But with that, I will turn it over to Meredith.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Will. Hello, everyone. I am Meredith Horowski. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am the Senior Director of the network at Code for America. So have the extraordinary privilege of working with Will and Cece and Tom, Veronica, many others that you know and love on the network team, and working closely with Ben and Thad on the NAC, of course, the rest of the NAC as well, and many of you. So I feel a tremendous amount of joy and humility in being able to do this work together. And thank you all so much for showing up for conversations like this on your Saturday evening. We deeply appreciate it. So I am this is going to be a participatory session. I hope many of you don't drop off after I say that, because I know it's probably been a long day, but your perspectives in this conversation really, really matter. So we want to know what you think, whether you are a first-time brigade member, and maybe this is your first event, or you've recently joined, or if you've been here for going on 10 years now. We want to know your perspective on what success looks like, on what's working, on how we need to make adjustments to the current kind of context we're in, and where we go in the next 10 years for Code for America. So in the spirit of kind of sharing space together and participating together in this endeavor, in this conversation, I want to invite us all just to take a bit of a breath together. We're all bringing in different experiences, different perspectives, different energy into the space. Personally, I was at a funeral earlier today, so I am bringing that into this space. I know others of you on this call have suffered loss of different kinds recently. Some of you may be feeling really energized and have had some amazing and enriching conversations today. Maybe you're feeling pretty exhausted. It is evening on a Saturday for those of you on the East Coast. So with that, invite us to ground ourselves in the physical space that we are in addition to the virtual space we are sharing. So I want to invite you to just take a big breath in and then let it out. Feel free to make some noise. Don't be afraid of your own voice. 1, 2, 3. Out. Let's do one more together. Big breath in. Feel it in your body and your shoulders. Out. Right. Thank you all. Appreciate that. With that, I am going to share my screen and also introduce my co-conspirators for today's conversation. See if I can get this situated properly so I can still look at the chat while we're talking. I presume you can all see this okay. If you can't, you know what to do. Just shout at me. All right.
Let's go on my computer.
Great. Okay. So a through line of this conversation is going to be, what does it look like when we succeed together as a network? What are the kinds of outcomes and changes we want to see in the world? And joining me for this discussion is Ben Trevino, who many of you know as leader of Code for Hawaii, co-chair of our National Advisory Council, and all-around extraordinary human. Thank you so much, Ben, for your help in this conversation, as well as much work in the lead up to it, as well as Jess Sand, who is a brigade leader for Open Oakland, and might put Jess in the category of a civic tech elder, has lots of wise things to say about how to do technology well, particularly in a crisis, and in a way that is responsive and respectful of community. And of course, Thad Karofsky, who's a brigade leader of Code for Boston, as well as a member of our National Advisory Council. I just so appreciate Thad's wisdom on so many fronts, the energy that he brings, his commitment. I feel like he's always in many places at once. So thank you all for conspiring on this session together, the work you've done to get us here, as well as your leadership within the network. All right. So I'm going to start with saying a few words about our vision at Code for America, because we are talking about theory of change, and theory of change is situated within a mission and vision of an organization. So the vision, which is really how we want the world to be. What do we want to see happen in the world through our work. And for Code for America, that is government can work for the people, by the people in the digital age. And situated underneath that is our mission. So the mission is generally what we do in service of that vision. So it's a little bit more internally focused. How does your organization contribute to this kind of bigger picture vision? So for Code for America, our mission is using the principles and practices of the digital age to improve how government serves the American public and how the public improves government. So we're not going to say too much more about mission and vision, but what we are going to dig into is the network's role in helping to achieve some of these really kind of big picture and generational work that we're embarking on together. If you do want to dig into more about our mission and vision and how we arrived at them, because it was a participatory process that included several brigade members and leaders across our network, I encourage you to go to codeforamerica.org/values, which also has our values and our operating principles that we articulated alongside our vision and mission as well. So since the Brigade Network began, which was about 8 or 9 years ago, I think we've seen ourselves as playing a particularly important role in the by the people part of Code for America's vision. So government for the people, by the people in the digital age. And at this stage, we have a pretty vast network. We have almost 90 brigades across the country. We have 25,000 people who are showing up in some capacity every single year. We mobilized over 1,000 people just a few weeks ago on National Day of Civic Hacking, hundreds of people throughout Brigade Congress. I think as we've grown as an organization, we've also gotten better at asking ourselves some important questions about who we are and how we go about our work and why. So about a year ago, so this was Brigade Congress last fall in October, the NAC and the network team often come together for a day of thinking through, how are we having success? What do we need to learn from? How do we come together and figure out where to go from here? And we were asking ourselves at that time questions like, what level of connection do brigades need between themselves and also Code for America HQ? Are our projects having the impact that we want? What is our relationship to each other, and what is the structure of the network that we want to create? And we realized the questions we were really asking ourselves is like, how are we as a network going about achieving our vision? And what about pieces of what we're doing are currently working and aren't working? So the question we were asking ourselves is, what is our theory of change? How do we actually go about achieving our vision? And we think that the answer to this is pretty foundational, from everything to the expectations we set with new brigades, to what partnerships we prioritize, to where we focus resources. So it feels like an incredibly important question for us to have some shared understanding around and some shared sense of kind of ownership over what our theory of change looks like, which brings us in part to tonight's conversation and some work that's been done in previous workshops, as well as in conversations with the NAC, as well as some experimentation with things this year, including things like our priority action areas and different ways we integrate with Code for America projects as well that we've experimented with this year. So before we go too much further into the participatory piece of this, I promise I'll be done talking shortly. I want to ground us in, okay, what is the definition of a theory of change if that's what we're trying to solve for? The theory of change is really what connects the how and the why to the what of the mission and the vision. So if you say we're trying to have government work in the digital age, your theory of change supplements, okay, exactly how are you going to do that? What makes you think that the actions you're taking as an organization, the things you're prioritizing as volunteers and in brigades are going to help achieve that outcome? And a theory of change, if it's a good one, should be pretty clear, pretty logical, step by step to some degree. It should be able to articulate, here's what we are going to do, and here's the impact we think that's going to have in the world, and here's the changes we think that's going to influence, and then here's how we win. So your theory of change should end in, we're going to do all of this stuff, and it's going to have all of these impact, and this is how we win. This is how that helps us achieve our ultimate vision. And we will send you these slides, of course, after this. So couple, that's not what I want to share with you. This is what I want to share with you. I know that's a bit philosophical, so to bring this down to earth a little bit, there's an organization called DataShift that exists within the kind of civic tech ecosystem, thinking about how we use data to influence community and society. And they do a great job of laying out their theory of change. So they say, and they put it on their website, which is something I think we should explore too, as we proceed in these conversations and identify some consensus together. They do a great job of saying, okay, here's the activities that we implement. Here's the things that we are focused on as an organization. So exactly what these things are, don't ask me, but feel free to click on their website if you'd like to find out more. So they do direct support, they have a fund, they do a learning zone, but they say like, this is what we do as an organization. And then they say, okay, here's the changes that those things influence. We're going to do all of these things to increase capacity of community organizations. We're going to provide the spaces for civil society organizations to convene and collaborate. That's going to create more harmonization and coordination between these organizations, as well as the data that they work with. And they're saying all of those changes are going to produce these outcomes in the world. These are the things that are going to be different. There's going to be increased coverage of citizen-generated data. They're going to have improved harmonization of different data sets. They're going to have more credibility. So these are the things that kind of change in the world as a result of their activities. And then those changes support this overarching objective. So this is tied to the mission and vision of the organization, that civil society organizations can effectively produce and use citizen-generated data to monitor development processes. I will acknowledge that a lot of this theory of change is a bit wordy, and a lot of these are like $10 words, which is something we might want to think about in developing our theory of change, in ensuring to use more accessible language. But it's a good example of how a theory of change is structured and what it is, how it creates that sort of pathway to victory, if you will. So they're saying all of this supports this objective, and at the end of the day, it's going to result in people-powered accountability to drive progress on sustainable development. So I'll put a link to this in the chat as well, if you want to reference that going forward. And with that, can you also see my screen?
Not anymore.
Could you see my screen at all when I was going through the data shift? Oh, okay. Okay, cool. That would have been awkward. I was just talking to myself. All right, I'm going to go back to the screen share, and I think this is where I hand it over almost to others on the panel, so you can stop hearing me talk. Okay, so what does all this mean for us, the network? I have a hypothesis that there's kind of several theories of change that exist within the network. So we're not necessarily starting from ground zero when we are thinking about developing our theory of change. What we are trying to do is like surface existing theories of change that exist. Again, that theory of change being our like pathway to victory, the how we achieve our mission and vision. And frankly, some of these exist in what I call dynamic tension with each other. So they almost pull each other in different directions and necessitate different strategies, different sets of values, which is why it feels really important for us to get some clarity on which elements of our theory of change or the different ones that exist within the network feel truest to us now. Maybe there's some that we've outgrown. Maybe there's some that are no longer appropriate for the state of the world we're in today and going forward. Maybe there's some that are kind of problematic and have been problematic, and that we need to assess and move on from. So a few of these, and these are only a few that exist within the network, are that we train future public servants. That our sort of success model is that we're saying we're training folks to be the public servants with the digital skills to go into government to then transform the way government serves people. So that's one theory of change. Another is that we have a role to play in advocating for policy that is more focused on implementation and delivery. Another is that our bread and butter is really to support local value-aligned groups to help serve folks where government is falling short, and to fill in the gaps of where government isn't meeting people's needs in terms of digital service delivery. So you can see how some of these lead us in pretty different directions and can potentially compete against each other a little bit. So that leads us again to like why we're having this conversation, because it feels like this underlies a lot of what we do as a network and how we figure out where we go from here in the next 5-10 years or so. I should also add, one of the reasons we're able to dig into this is because we do have a new CEO at Code for America who is, so that provides sort of a natural transition point for us to think about where have we been, where do we want to go from here, and what is the perspective that we as a network want to offer to our new CEO that says that we really think this is the role that the network should play in Code for America's future, and this is how we help to achieve a common mission and vision. So that's a good segue into our desired outcomes. We really want to get pretty concrete, and through work that's been done up until now, as well as tonight's workshop and beyond, synthesize all of that to have a few different options for our theory of change within the network that we can propose to Amanda, our new CEO, as part of the process for figuring out what our next phase looks like. And we want to be able to identify some of those methods of success that we can align upon and figure out what are the implications of that on our strategy and our resources. What does that mean for how the network team needs to support brigades? What does that mean for things brigades want to focus on in 2021 and beyond? And now is a great time for that because we're starting to do planning for 2021 and figuring out what we want to focus on together. So with that, I think I'm going to hand it over to Ben to tell us what's been done so far.
Yeah. And thank you, Meredith. Thank you for laying all that out. I want to observe that, I don't really know this is true, but I feel like the dexterity with these kinds of theory of change ideas, how to wield them because they are so powerful is one of Meredith's superpowers. And like with any superpower, and many exist throughout the network, it's so important to wield them responsibly. And I really admire Meredith for like having this superpower, but doing everything possible to just listen as hard as she could to the network about what was coming out, what do we already know, what are people saying, and modeling that for the network is I just really admire that about this process, and I hope what comes across in where we are today is that this is part of that. This is part of that listening, and that's what we intend to keep doing is listen and adjust, so that when we deploy this very powerful tool of theory of change, we can course correct when we need to, and we're able to really be responsive to the reality of the network and what strengths we have. So I just want to open with that. I'm going to kind of talk about a tool that I hope everyone has had a chance to play around with and weigh in on. And it's the Polis tool that we've shared in several different venues. Big mahalo to big thank you to the Congress team for helping promote the tool that we've been developing and put it out in different venues. This Polis tool is something that we are experimenting with, and to give it a quick description, it's a tool to sort out where there is agreement and disagreement. It's a tool that scales for a high volume of engagement, and so we can have potentially thousands of participants, and yet provides an opening and openness to comments from all over the network. And the way it works is you load the page, it asks if you agree or disagree with a statement, and then based on those responses, it organizes the responses into groups. And from those groups, we're able to see where, importantly, number one, where there are different positions, where those positions kind of start and end, what the boundaries of them are, and then equally importantly, where there's consensus. What is it that we all agree on and can build on together, and while recognizing the different positionality that we have. So that's the intent of the Polis. We're really experimenting with it, and we've been lucky to have not only Meredith's superpower, but also Thad's and Jess's to reflect on what would make this a productive conversation, and then how to generate more input and use the results. So all I want to do is encourage you to try the Polis out and weigh in there, and also share it, because I think we'll keep it open for at least another week or so, depending on how this session goes, and then share some of the consensus results. Just quickly kind of share some of the results that are found. And these are things that you can see in the Polis itself. There's a visualization that shows the groups and then lets you kind of explore what the statements pertain to each group. But Meredith, can you advance
Ben,
to the next slide?
Sorry, I just want to do a quick time check. We're almost at halftime, so just a note.
Okay. Okay. So let's go through these slides and just kind of. I'm going to skip the group slides, and maybe we can
FYI,
pass
some of these are embedded as examples in the Miro board. So if people feel like they're missing some of the detail level on the statements, they'll be reflected as well in the exercise that we do together.
Yeah, thank you, Jess, and thanks for that time check. So there's a summary slide, 2 summary slides at the end of this that I think show the combined consensus statement, so you can get a sense for what these statements are like. So actually those two. So statement number 26. Thank you, Meredith. That's the one. I want my brigade to serve as a partner and champion for traditionally marginalized groups who are otherwise underserved by local government, is an example of somewhere where there was broad agreement. And so again, these have been embedded in the workshop activity, so you'll be able to see them in detail there. And then Meredith, you can go to the next slide. Statement number 33 is an example where there was broad disagreement with the statement. So not everyone answered it the same way, which is to disagree with it. And that statement was, I want my brigade to deliver end-to-end technology solutions to local government, similar to how a vendor might, which I think is instructive to us in how we think about where brigades are in the full spectrum of options, right? This is certainly something that is possible, but as it was expressed, at least by the people answering the poll list, it's not something that's desirable. And so I think that's the kind of power of this tool, the kinds of things that we're looking to find out. But it's only one part of the process, particularly with the theory of change, which is really about a sequential logic and a story and a pathway to victory. And so I think maybe here I can hand it off to Jess and or Thad to talk about the Canvas and breakout activity that we're going to do.
Thad, do you want to preface this at all?
Yeah, sure. Will and I recently got Miro to, the Code for America and Miro have each kind of offered a little bit of support here. Miro, because we are participating in COVID response, has donated the first year, and then Code for America has kind of offered to cover the Miro ongoing if we use it in a kind of limited way. And so to that end, we're kind of using it, we're testing it in this session. And the account will be hosted by the NAC. And if you're interested to use it, just like we're going to today, just ping me on the Code for America Slack, and I'm happy to get you in so you have access as well. So Jess has done a lot of setup on the board that looks really beautiful, and thanks so much for doing that. So maybe you can explain what we're gonna aim at here.
Sure. I'm not sure if I should try to share my screen to share just an broad overview of the board and just do a quick sort of, let's see if I'm able to. Whoops, I need to be a cohort. Oh, thank you. All right. So hopefully you all can see my screen now.
Yes.
So I'm taking that's a yes. So basically what you're looking at is a board. We'll drop the link in the chat. There's a set of instructions on the right here. You can unpin this little note so that it disappears if you wish, so that you don't have to look at it the whole time. You can click on these big yellow squares to get to your group. It'll pull you right to the, this little arrow here will pull you right to that location on the board in case you get lost. Basically what you're gonna do, it's pretty straightforward. We have several buckets of information. So if we're gonna break out into groups. So if you're in group 1, you'll go to your section on the board. And there's a bunch of stickies and voting dots here. The most important thing really is the stickies, I think. The idea is to just grab a sticky, or you can grab one from the menu on the left, or you can grab one of the pre-stuck stickies and drag it into the bucket and add your note. The idea here is this is generative. We're trying to capture capture ideas, capture additional statements similar to what the polis was capturing in a slightly different format, but then also start to group and organize them a bit into what will eventually become a sort of theory of change logic structure. So we start with looking at, these are just some of our basic beliefs and values our brigade holds. You can really think about this at the local level. I think this really is about each of our own experiences within the brigades. And you'll see there are some pre-populated stickies that reflect some of what came in through the polis exercise prior to this. So because we hold these beliefs, therefore, we want to see these goals or outcomes happening in our local communities. And again, there are some sticky notes to give you some examples of how this might be framed or phrased. This is a bit more of an art than a science in terms of sort of figuring out what the right level of detail is for you. But if you really just think about what is your vision for your local community and local government, you can sort of start to see how that might get applied here. And then from there, in order to make that happen, we want to look at what changes need to occur. So these are sort of outcomes specific, but what do we need to see happen, right? So in this case, we want to create new civic technologists. Some folks wants their nearby city to come to their brigade with internal but open source projects. So these are sort of, actual things that we see in the world happening differently because we're actually doing what we do. And then moving further down, we therefore do these activities. So these are the actual things that our brigades are doing. And we've grouped this a little bit further so that we can capture some detail, because there is some nuance here, right? There's stuff we do now as a brigade. Right now, for example, maybe some of us are augmenting or expanding our local government's digital capacity. And there's things we'd like to do more of that are like, super valuable to us. Maybe we're not doing them yet, but we would like to be. And again, you'll see actually a repeat here. It's okay if there's repetition across some of these. This will all get sorted out following this exercise. And then finally, things we want to do less of. So some of those disagreement statements actually have appeared here as well. Like, I don't want my brigade to prioritize amiable government partnerships over community needs, for example. So that's it. We'll jump into, I think, I assume we'll assign sort of just automatically people into groups. I'm not sure the best way to do this in terms of breaking people out. But
Just share the link in the chat. Everyone can go and click that. A slight preference to Chrome. It can be a little easier to use, but if you're using Firefox, it works great too. I often use Firefox with Miro.
And then each of us will be in one of the breakout groups to help sort of guide and facilitate. But really, this is essentially a brainstorming exercise. You can use what's there as jumping off point or add new stuff as it comes up for you. Are there any questions or clarifications around before we jump into this piece of it? Because this is where you all really get to be hands-on and actually start contributing directly. Any questions on definitions or anything?
Does anyone want to do a thumbs up if they've used Miro before? Okay, we have a few people. Maybe if we could have one of y'all that have used Miro to kind of spread out amongst the groups to kind of share the familiarity.
If is there anybody on the phone call-in that is not able to be on the computer that might, because I think each breakout group facilitator could be a transcriber essentially for those folks if need be.
And we can have one group share the screen if needed to. Go ahead. Sorry, Jeff.
No, I was just saying, I see about 11 people in the Miro board now. Is there anybody to recenter the view? Yeah, Allison. So there's a little map in your lower right-hand corner. There should be, and there should be a little box around that kind of shows you where you are in the view, and you can drag that around if that's helpful.
And also the plus and minus keys on your keyboard can also be useful to zoom in and zoom out. And if you click on Jess's name at the top or my name, you can also see what I see. But actually, I think the best way to go into the groups is like Jess was showing in the notes. You just click one of the groups. So we'll have to decide how we're going to split up the groups amongst these 21-ish people we have here.
So a suggestion, are we going to use the breakout feature, the Zoom breakout feature, and Will, are you able to help us with that?
Yeah, I can split people into breakout rooms. I see there are 4 groups here. If I split people randomly into 4, that'll be pretty much even. We'll have one group that has 6 instead of 5. Should I just do that?
Yeah, and then facilitators, we can just pop in and out until we're spread out.
I believe that everyone, if you as a facilitator want to move, you'll have to return to the main room and I'll put you in another room.
Okay, I just want to make sure we can each get in one room so that there's
Yeah.
there's a facilitator in each.
Okay, so I'm
So
going to
if
set
there's
up.
double up, one of us will leave. Come back.
Yeah, I'll set up breakout rooms, and then if you are in a double room, then come back to the main, and I'll break you out again.
How's it going, everyone? So I see that a few of the groups use the dot voting, but not everybody. So that's fine. I guess once Jess gets back, we will debrief for a moment. Is this the last session of the evening, Will?
So we have one more informal thing after this, which is just another happy hour with some more unconference session voting. That'll be at the top of the hour or whenever we're done here. We'll open the room at the room at the top of the hour and start the unconference pitches at 1/4 past. So folks have a moment to step away if they need to.
Okay. Jess, do you want to debrief us?
Sure. So hopefully that was, as I feel like it was actually pretty productive given how quickly we were asked to do that. Our group, I think, there was a lot of alignment, I think, around particularly things like efficiency and, creating reusable systems and better collaboration. As well as something that came up a bunch was, I think, the value of providing access to things like budgetary information and data, providing access for residents and making that stuff more accessible. So there was definitely a bunch of alignment. I suspect we probably could have gone on for another 20 minutes or so, at least. I'd be interested. I don't know. I forget if we have time to sort of do a share out a little bit across the groups, but I know we're a little bit short. But it looks like we're almost at time. So.
Yeah. So should we take this board and kind of recombine it into one, maybe as a next step, and then kind of report out on? Maybe I can report out on some of these things somehow through another means. Meredith, I know you have a schedule for how you want to feed these things up into the next phase.
Looks like I'm muted. Okay, couple quick things in closing. To that point, I think it would be great if we could complete these, so spend a little bit more time on these. So can you all, I know I can't really go one by one, but commit to spending a little bit more time thinking about this from now until the end of the day tomorrow to add stickies as you think of them. So putting in a request that you continue to work on these, and then the organizing team will work on kind of synthesizing these inputs from these Miros as well as the poll list that we created, and reflect back to everybody who's participated today. Like here's some of what we're seeing. Here's where there's consensus. Here's where there's differences. And then continue to refine some theory of change statements for what does our pathway to victory look like? What do we want to prioritize most? And then work on fleshing out implications of that. Like if we've got lots of people who say we need to do more advocacy in order to be effective, then that's an indication to us in 2021 that we need to develop more guidance around what advocacy looks like and opportunities to do advocacy locally. That's just a hypothetical, but what are the implications of some of what's coming up here? And then present where we have some consensus and what those implications are to our new CEO as part of our 2021 planning process, and report back outcomes from that discussion by the end of the year. So that's what we're hoping to do. So we will invite you to join a Slack channel that we have going on this, and you can expect us to, again, sort of like synthesize what we're hearing and get your feedback on if that reflects your experience and your reality as well. Anything I missed there, Ben, Thad, and Jeff?
So we do need a discourse. Do we have an existing discourse post for this, or should I create one?
I want to say there's a placeholder. Will, is that right?
Yes, I'm sorry. I was just trying to create the Zoom room for the next session. Yeah, there should be a discourse post. Let me see if I can pull it up. Hold on 1 second.
Oh, I see it. I found it. Let me share that link for everyone.
Thank you, Jess.
Yeah, so we will, we'll populate that with the outputs from this session. And then folks can continue on the Miro board. And then, yes, I think there were some questions around follow-up. Can we propose this as a brigade activity for our next meetup? That would be brilliant. You could basically recreate this whole session for your brigade if you wanted to. I intend to do that for Open Oakland, at least at probably an abridged version. But yes, I think that should be encouraged.
Yeah, and
Thanks.
yeah,
It's
thank
really
you,
great.
everyone.
This is well-designed activity. And for everyone else that's joining the conversation, please join us on that discourse post. I think we can coordinate there and share ideas about how to spread this out as an activity.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Good
Thank
job.
you. Hope to see you at the happy hour to talk about some unconference stuff for tomorrow.
Have a great evening.